Welcome to another edition of Community Forum. My name is Joseph Feaster and I am your host. I have an exciting guest here, an informative guest who actually needs no introduction. He has served in the legislature for 17 years, has been our senator here in Stoughton for all of that time, and has just been an extraordinary individual who has represented us well in our capital here in Massachusetts. And at this time, I'd like to definitely have you join me in welcoming our state senator, Senator Brian A. Joyce. Senator, welcome.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here. Turns out that I've been representing Stoughton and a number of surrounding communities since 2002. So now 12 years, because we redistrict every every decade after the census. So I represent Norfolk. It's funny, when we're recognized on the floor of the Senate, the chair, the Senate president typically would say, the gentleman from Norfolk, Bristol, and Plymouth. For what purpose does this gentleman rise? So we're identified by our counties, and I have Norfolk, Bristol, and Plymouth counties essentially from Braintree going down Route 24 as far as about west and East Bridgewater.
So therefore you also have Milton and Canton.
Milton, Canton, Avon, Stoughton, Sharon, Easton, Randolph, Braintree, East Bridgewater, West Bridgewater. So 10 communities in total. So
the correction to my introduction would be that we've had the pleasure of having you represent us for 12 years.
Correct.
So it turns, well, I'm happy that
I'll tell you a funny story. When I was first elected in 1998, the seat it was referred to as the Dorchester seat. It had been held by a person from Dorchester since 1780. And I was the, heretic from the suburbs that that captured that seat. And then after the redistricting, the population had shifted more toward southeastern Mass, and the district shifted south.
That's interesting, because again, I was in Boston, dealing with Boston politics. If you said the name, I probably know the name of who was your predecessor there.
Paul White.
Paul White. Oh yes. Well, in terms of that, Senator Paul White, I see him often because he's very much involved in what I'm in, which is a community health center movement. So definitely. So that's what I forgot, that it was Senator Paul White, Dorchester, that had the districts. And if folks know their history, they'll know that Dorchester extended for much further south than what we're talking about right now.
I think it actually included the town of Stoughton, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, it did in terms of Stoughton, in fact, but I always say that Stoughton is the center, and places like Sharon and other were called Stoneham. I did some of this research when I was interim town manager to really learn about what was going on here. So again, Senator, it has been a pleasure knowing you both as a friend, but also being our
senator.
So
let me just finish along that theme. So I was, for years, driving one of my boys to hockey, and he used to play over at the University of Massachusetts in Boston on Morrissey Boulevard. And I would cross over this bridge, and I saw this dilapidated sign that was just, 40 years old and beat up and essentially falling over. And the bridge itself was in disrepair. And I looked at the sign one time, and it said it was the John J. Beads Bridge. And I said, I think that name sounds familiar. It turns out he had held the seat, 50 years before me. And I'm thinking all that poor fellow probably did in his career, and money was very, very short in those days. In all the efforts he probably made, all that was left of him was this broken down sign. And it made me do two things. One, focus, not forget my family, what's important. And second, I got that sign repaired and got the bridge repaired.
All right, well, in terms of, so is it now called the Brian A. Joyce Bridge?
No.
Well, let's talk about, you just finished a budget, you just finished a legislative year. And again, I know that you've appeared so many times in this program, so I won't have you try to educate our viewing audience on the legislative process. But let's talk about the budget. How do you feel about the budget that was passed this year? How much is the budget for FY 2015? I guess is what we're talking about. What What can we expect for the districts that you represent? Why don't you give us a little insight into that?
Sure. Well, first let me just say that the state of the state is actually pretty good. We're not quite through the legislative session. We end on July 31st, so we're right at the end. And in my tenure in the State House, I've never been busier. As we film this show, I have two major pieces that will be on the Senate floor tomorrow: an environmental bond bill, as well as a legislation that will reduce energy consumption and create, we think, 10,000 jobs. But the state of the Commonwealth overall is pretty good. We have unemployment is reduced to about 5.6%, the lowest it's been in 6 years. I think we added 9,100 new jobs in Massachusetts in May. A bond rating, I chair the bonding committee, is AA+. It's the highest it's ever been, which reduces our cost of borrowing. So generally, the state of the Commonwealth in terms of our finances is good. That being said, there are still an awful lot of people who are out of work or not working enough or as much as they would like to. So as much as we always accentuate the good news, and things are improving finally, mercifully, but there's still families that are hurting, and we're always very, very conscious of that. One of the things we focused on in this year's budget is something that's impacting families across the state, across Stoughton, across Sharon, across Avon, across every town in the state. And that is this really epidemic, this scourge of drug addiction. We have this opiate addiction that is truly an epidemic in our state. And one of the things that was a significant focus of our budgeting efforts this year was to try to address this drug addiction problem and provide for families and provide a means whereby we can combat this and work with folks who are suffering and the families that are suffering. We also.
So let me just ask you on that particular point, just in contrast to that, we're talking about in one hand that there's opiate addiction, and the other hand, and again, this is not to profess my views on it, but we have the issue of the medical marijuana and those opening up them shots. How do we juxtapose those? How do we rationalize those?
It's funny, Joseph. It's a great question. It's a great question, and I don't know if the listeners can hear it. By the way, we have drums playing. In the background. So that if I was a little bit disjointed in my last response, because all of a sudden I heard a brass band start up behind me, but it's interesting. What happened with the marijuana question that was on the ballot, even my own family was split on it. Truthfully, I voted no, and one of my sons voted no, my wife voted yes, and two of our children voted yes. So we lost in our household 3-2. And I support the concept of medical marijuana. I do believe for a very small group of individuals, marijuana can provide some pain relief, can provide some medicinal benefit. I saw an excellent documentary done on CNN on the medicinal value of marijuana. I absolutely believe it has, some value to some patients. That being said, the referendum that was put on the ballot was not written by any medical professional. It was written by a lobbyist on behalf of business interests that wanted to sell marijuana. No medicinal. It was a little bit like, in my opinion, calling, instead of having coal, we have clean coal technology now, still polluting the air, right? So we put the word medicinal in front of marijuana, and suddenly it has this halo effect. I honestly don't think that is necessarily true. I think that it would have been better if the legislation had been crafted carefully, thoughtfully by the legislature, and not really slapped together by a lobbyist only interested in the business interest. That being said, it is the law, so we have to deal with it.
But I raised that because I wanted to get your perspective on it, because again, because I just was sitting here listening to your explanation about trying to address, which has been documented as far as the drug issue, that's an opiate issue that's going on throughout the Commonwealth, as you indicated. But again, I wanted you to talk about that because I can expect that a viewing audience is sitting there positing the same question I posed. Well, how on the one hand we're doing it? So I think that
Well, many of those folks in the viewing audience voted for medical
Absolutely.
marijuana, and so
Yeah.
so your point is well taken. It's absolutely not the case that the majority of marijuana users go on to use opiates, but it is the case the overwhelming majority of those who are addicted to opiates started with marijuana and or alcohol, and it does it is demonstrably proven that those folks who we're trying to treat now, who have serious opiate addiction, have, in almost all instances, begun with marijuana and or alcohol. So the reality is, it is the law, and I think in 2016, we're very likely to have recreational marijuana on the ballot. And my sense is that will pass as well. So it's not my job to make a kind of a moral decision, or really in this instance, the voters are going to make the decision. My job is to make sure that we implement it as prudently as possible. I was very critical of the Department of Public Health in the awarding of those medical marijuana dispensary licenses, was one of the most vocal critics. To their credit, they've revoked many of those awards and have truly sought to clean up the process. And again, in their defense, they're dealing with this legislation that was thrust upon them. So,
and we're wrestling with that here in Stoughton as well, Senator.
No question, no question. So you had an applicant here in Stoughton. I think the Board of Selectmen did not at the time support it. There was you have a very active group of really students in Stoughton that works against, I think, tobacco use, and I think they spoke up vigorously against this. But again, I think it has a place, properly regulated, restricted. But going back to the budget, we did increase funding for local cities and towns for education by about $100 million. One of the things we've done, I think, pretty well is weathered this economic storm that goes back to 2008. We didn't engage in basically spending money we didn't have. California, for example, used borrowed money to fund government, like paying your mortgage on your credit card, just not good fiscal policy. We did make cuts early. We did try to live within our limited means. As a result, our bond rating, as I said, has been increased. And now, as the economy does improve, we're able to ramp back up and invest in important areas like transportation, the environment, and certainly our public schools. So it's a balanced budget. It's not all things to all people, but in certain areas, another area we have a good focus this year is in the area of mental health treatment. There's an increasing awareness that mental health issues impact.
And you've been a leader in that, Senator.
I have.
I've been present
Yeah.
when you've taken the leadership on that issue, and I personally, as you know, my personal stories, I personally applaud you for that.
Well, it's interesting. My dad is 94 years old, and someone I respect and admire more than anyone I've ever known. And he told me something recently that was an eye-opener to me, because we were talking about how people didn't like to talk about mental health issues, right. And it was thought to be something you just didn't talk about, and people were ashamed to discuss it. And my father told me when he was a kid, people were ashamed or didn't talk about cancer. And I said, it was like an epiphany for me. It was really, And so certainly people suffer from mental health issues. We did pass a number of years ago, both in the state and federal level, mental health parity, so that insurers have to provide the same level of coverage for mental ailments as they do for physical ailments. And in many instances now, the science reveals that some of those mental health issues may in fact be physical, may in fact be physiological. But the reality is not all insurers are playing by the rules, and so I have legislation that will put some additional teeth in that and allow a private cause of action, attorney's fees, treble damages, everything else that will bring the insurers right into line. So it is an issue that's important to me and to a lot of families throughout the district.
Well, I've definitely focused on that particular issue and was engaged with a number of different organizations, Healthcare for All, and on the mental health parity issue, because even with the Affordable Care Act, we now have that
Right.
in what insurers and hospitals have to engage in. But I think you have taken it a step further, because you have said, fine, we will, that says, I trust you. Yours says, I'll trust you with monitoring to ensure that it will happen. But I want to come back. I want to be somewhat parochial about it. I'm a Stoughtonite, and I want to talk about some of the issues budget-wise that I know
Don't
are
forget, you
important
run
to
in
us.
other towns too.
Yeah. But that's true. Well, in terms of for this evening, I'm going to let's talk about Stoughton a little bit. Two areas that would have, certainly you've been definitely supportive of and basically leading the charge in the legislature on, and that's on our school, high school funding, and the other one is on state theater. What's the latest on those? What's the prognosis on those?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for that softball question. That was a good one. So, in terms of the Stoughton High School, it was you, Joseph Feaster, aided by aided and abetted by some very good people that serve on it currently and previously served on your school committee. The current I guess past chair, Joyce Husseini, Deborah Sauvigny, who is no longer on the board, made it their mission at your behest to convince me that Stoughton needed a new high school. And I worked with Representative Galvin, Representative Kafka, of course, and one of the things that comes with a little bit of seasoning and tenure in the legislature is the ability to, I guess, utilize some personal and professional relationships. And so what happened was the School Building Authority had suggested Stoughton was only about 107th on the statewide list of needy school buildings, and they were only going to fund anywhere from 4 to 7 in this round, and so we were able to persuade them to move Stoughton up over 100 places, leapfrog over perhaps some other communities, and if the voters now support the local component, Stoughton will end up having a beautiful state-of-the-art high school. And let me just make a plug for that, because I've been through this in a number of other towns. In my hometown of Milton, we did 6 brand new schools, and it changed the town forever. I mean, it truly did. By the way, they did name the high school auditorium after me. We were asking that earlier, but it doesn't say Memorial, which is my happiest one.
Well, I drive by it every day coming in. I come down Blue Hill Parkway, and I drive by the high school. So
what happened is the real estate values skyrocketed. The young families were, bursting to get into town, and so for people that didn't have children in the schools anymore, that may be sellers, their values went up. And what we were able to show is that the amount of money the local taxpayers paid for the local portion was less than they would have paid to maintain the old school buildings that were in serious need of repair. And so I've seen it in Sharon, I've seen it in Easton, I've seen in Canton, what an incredible effect these school building renovations or new buildings have on the property values. And we suspect that this project would be paid for maybe as much as 68% by the Commonwealth, depending upon some variables, say 64 to 68%. And the local Stoughton taxpayers, by paying 30 or 34%, would get potentially, a $60+ million new school building that is energy efficient, far less costly to operate, and also far less costly to maintain. So I'm hopeful, but that's a local decision. But if the local voters decide to support this effort, we now have locked down the state assistance, and I think that's very important for the town.
Well, let me do this because I can, since Roy Cohen told me I'm the host, so I can do certain liberties. He hasn't pulled the mic off for me yet, so I'm gonna, because I wanted to talk about some, I like to educate as well, and I want to talk about some electoral politics, and this is a point, because you made it appear like miraculously this movement from 107 to being within the 7, as if this thing just happens because it happens. I just want to make clear to the viewing audience that is just not the case. It is the efforts of our senator and of his fellow legislators, Galvin and Kafka, in order to make this happen. That is a Herculean task that they have accomplished by doing this. And I want to make sure that people understand. I mean, some will say, oh, we got we got the statewide building authority, a school building authority in order to do that. That's just not how it happens, Senator. And I just don't want folks to gloss over it and to think that this is just happenstance. That just is not the case.
Well, you're kind to say that.
Yes.
And, it's delightful if we can bring back $50+ million to the town of Stoughton, and maybe $60 million. That's just a big win. But let me say, it's not just about bringing the bacon back to the district. It's something that I believe in. I truly believe if we provide our children with a state-of-the-art learning facility, it helps prepare them to compete in this, what is now a global economy. If they have state-of-the-art laboratories, state-of-the-art technological centers. I'm looking at a piece of paper and it has a Facebook and a Twitter logo on it. Last week I went out to Facebook, Twitter, and Google. And it was just it was like being in a parallel universe to see, and really these young kids, what they were doing, and the multiple billions of dollars at stake with these companies. And what they're looking for is bright young talent that's adequately prepared. And the reading and writing and arithmetic is still the core that all our children need, but they need a little bit more in terms of technological and scientific and engineering. And so I think these state-of-the-art buildings help prepare our children to compete in a global economy, and I think it helps property values throughout the town. Let me, you asked also about the...
But can I just stop? I want to stay on this point because just for a moment more, because I also think metaphors and analogies are great. You have now taken this issue down to the 10-yard line. Mm-hmm. What is Stoughton going to need to do to take it to make it turns to a touchdown?
Well, I mean, I think that's going to be the local decision to turn to the taxpayers and see if they'll support the tax costs of the town share, which again is probably, I don't have the specific figures for Stoughton, but I've seen in other communities it's often less than what it would cost to maintain the old property, and you don't get that boost in values and your kids don't get that new facility. But part of my job is to ensure that as much of the taxpayers' hard-earned money is returned to the district I represent. My job is 3 essential components. First is to vote on the statewide issues that impact all of us. Mm-hmm. And they can be very high profile or they can be relatively mundane. Second is to advocate for my district. So I look for what are the particular needs. You mentioned the State Theater. I'm happy to talk about that. And third is to respond to the constituents. I have almost 70,000 people that I work for, and if they contact my office, I know the issue is important to them, and we try to get right back to them. In this instance, for Stoughton, we identified this school, thanks to the advocacy of the 2 gentle ladies that we just mentioned and yourself. And then second, I spoke with John Stagnone and did a tour of the beautiful, once beautiful downtown State Theater. And I bet most people in Stoughton have never been in that facility and would be stunned to see just how big this beautiful theater is.
It is.
And so there's this, group of merry volunteers giving voluntarily of their time and talent to try to restore this, which could be a beautiful, cultural landmark in the center of Stoughton. So we did put in a recent bond bill, a $1 million authorization for the state, up to $1 million to contribute toward this renovation. I'm quite confident that the State Theater will see at least $500,000 of that, and potentially the full $1 million to help toward that renovation. Another item that we were involved in was to get the state assistance for the town library for the library renovation. So part of the job is definitely to bring money back into the town of Stoughton, and hopefully it's money that's well spent and has a multiplier effect in terms of increasing economic activity, in cultural activity. And I think the State Theater is an example of a facility that could do both.
Well, Senator, you have, your tentacles into the number of issues and the constituents that you service. You said 170,000, but let's go into some of the cohorts. So, you are doing things, and I'd like you to talk about it, what you're doing for some of our seniors or for our elderly. You're doing some things for our veterans. Can you enlighten us some of the things you've done in this legislative year?
I have a number of responsibilities in the legislature. I'm in a leadership position where I chair the Committee on Bonding and Capital Expenditures and State Assets. Kind of a mouthful, but what it means is all long-term spending has to go through my committee. So this year, we will hear bond bills totaling in excess of $23 billion. And we help make the decisions on the state spending over the next 30 to 40 years. And so this year we've dealt with an information technology bond bill, an environmental bond bill I'll be arguing on the floor tomorrow, a housing bond bill, a military-based bond bill, a general government obligation bond bill. I've 2 or 3 others, I can't think of them at this moment, but we have serious committee responsibilities, and that's mine. I also sit on the Ways and Means Committee, and I'm Vice Chair of Healthcare Financing and also Vice Chair of Financial Services Committee. So that's part of what we do. In addition, we focus on areas of importance to us as individuals. We bring our life experiences. You mentioned seniors. My late mother suffered badly from Parkinson's disease and had other ailments throughout her life. And toward the end of her life, Mary and I bought the house next door to my parents, which was probably the best years of my life. But my father was just amazing the way he cared for my mother. Eventually, it got to be too much for him alone. And we had these, I'd say, angels of mercy, these home care workers come in and helped keep her in her home longer than she otherwise would have been able to. If you went to a senior center and you say, all right, how many of you would like to stay in your own home for as long as you possibly could before you go to a nursing home or stay out of a nursing home? You'd get 100 out of 100, right? So here I was, still a relatively young guy early in my career, and I became a champion of home health care, home care, and funding. And it was not only good public policy, but it was good fiscal policy, because it could cost $8,000 or $9,000 a year versus maybe $70,000 or $80,000 a year for a nursing home. So we increased funding again this year for home care. We have a number of other items important to our seniors. You mentioned veterans and the Valor Act. Massachusetts is actually the most generous state in the union to our veterans, and that's something that I think we can all be proud of. You would think of the states like maybe Virginia or South Carolina or something that have more of a military presence and a military history. It's actually here in Massachusetts, far and away, we have the most generous benefits to our veterans. And our veterans aren't just the heroes from World War II and Korea and Vietnam, but it's these kids now that are coming back from Afghanistan and from Iraq and often suffering from mental health issues and a whole host of issues. And so we on the state level, and there's been a lot of criticism of the Veterans Administration nationally recently, on the state level, we are providing our veterans with the best benefits of any state in the union.
Let me just, again, we don't choose to be controversial on Community Forum, but we're informed, And so I want to just raise this thought with you because when I was up on the Hill under the Dukakis administration, we had the Veterans Affairs was a secretariat. I don't, that's, if I stand correct, that's no longer the case. It's no longer a secretariat, it's more a commissioner that's there. Do you anticipate, in light of what's going on, that might be, that maybe the next governor might consider elevating that back to a secretariat?
I think it's a distinct possibility. I know that this governor reorganized, but I will say this governor has made Veterans Affairs and Veterans Benefits a significant priority and has had very capable leadership in place. So whether you call, whatever you call that individual, a secretary or not, he has had two very capable persons in that position, and I think we've done, under this administration, a very, very good job on behalf of veterans.
And I would. And
by the way, right here in Stoughton, you have an outstanding.
Oh, we have the best
veteran. I actually went to.
Michael is the best.
I went to a dinner down in Cape Cod, maybe a year and a half ago or so, because they were honoring him for his excellent work. Yeah,
well, again, I had the pleasure to serve with him here. You know, in my capacity, he is, Mike Pizarro is definitely committed to this. He has done an extraordinary job here, not only in Stoughton, but it has impact throughout the region. So, Mike, this is your plug. Michael Hartman, that may mean a raise, but in any event, this is something that has definitely been recognized, and I think it's appropriate in a public forum in order to give credit where credit is due. One of the other things that has been, I guess, very painstakingly apparent is the situation where folks are, the unemployment is still relatively high, the benefits have run out federal and state level, people are, you know, either not looking for employment or, you know, or really off the rolls, or there are, even though there are jobs that are being created, not able to make that connection. I know, again, through your leadership, the state is looking at these issues. Can you tell our viewing audience what's being done?
Well, we've done a couple of things. One is, I mean, again, I'm happy to report that really not through any legislative efforts, but the economic recovery is such that we now have 5.6% unemployment. It's the lowest it's been in 6 years. So the trend is positive. We do have, throughout our nation, a growing disparity between the haves and the have-nots. It may be the single biggest issue facing us societally right now is this growing wage disparity. On the low end of the scale, those folks making minimum wage, we did just pass a raise in the minimum wage, which would go up $1 a year until 2017, and so that we would finally have at least currently the highest minimum wage, but it's still not really a living wage. We need to certainly promote jobs that pay more than a minimum wage in order for a person to be able to support his or her family. I have legislation that will be heard tomorrow on which I've worked for over 3 years. It's called the PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy. What this legislation would do at no cost to the taxpayers through mass development, create bonding or borrowing opportunities for commercial and industrial property owners. So like in this building where we are right now, to do energy retrofits, and not just change the light bulbs, but deep energy retrofits, new boilers and the like, in excess of $150,000. We would create, through mass development, a low cost borrowing mechanism, and that cost would be more than offset by the energy savings. It would be underwritten so that you have to show your energy savings will be more than the cost of borrowing. And so what that does is reduces carbon emissions throughout the state. It's actually probably the low-hanging fruit. We think we save more energy with this retrofitting our existing commercial and industrial properties than we would or we do through the clean and alternative forms of energy that are heavily subsidized, the solar projects, the windmills, that sort of thing. Just making our existing industrial and commercial properties energy efficient, we think we know saves more energy than all the new stuff. Second, what it does, though, it creates, we think, in excess of 10,000 jobs. And these are the jobs for your local tradesperson. These aren't jobs that can be outsourced to China. These are jobs that your local contractor will now have the wherewithal to come in and compete with these huge companies, these, they call them ESCO, energy savings companies like Honeywell and Johnson Controls and Siemens and those big guys. Well, your local contractor will now be able to, get access to these jobs because the property owner has access to the funding. And it actually has a multiplier effect, because if the property or business owner is saving money on energy, well, he or she can invest in new jobs. And those local tradespeople, they're going to be supporting local supply houses. So it has a multiplier effect. So this is legislation that I think will help create jobs across the state, reduce energy consumption, and that's the type of policy that we need to do, because at the end of the day, as Tip O'Neill said, it's, politics is about jobs, jobs, and jobs. And if, we can help promote good jobs so people can support their families, pay their taxes, those taxes go to support our schools and public safety and public works. I mean, that's what it's all about, but it starts with those jobs.
Senator, I'm going to go off and deal with our sponsors for a moment. But when we come back, there's a few issues I'd like to chat about, though. I would like to, push on and talk about the casinos and that whole process. I would also, again, we're coming into an election year in September in terms of preliminaries, and then we have in terms of final election in November. I want to get your thoughts on those as well.
Okay.
So we'll be back in a moment. Senator Brian A. Joyce can be contacted if you want to go up to the State House and visit with him at room 109D at the State House, or give a call to his office at 617-722-1643, or you can email the senator at brianajoyce@masenate.gov, or you can check out his website to be aware of what the senator has been doing and is doing at www.brianajoyce.com or at Brian A. Joyce. Stoughton Farmers Market. It's been operating for a few weeks now, and hopefully you've taken an opportunity to go out there and get some fresh produce and listen to the music and have a good time. The Stoughton Farmers Market is held on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the First Parish Universalist Church, 790 Washington Street in Stoughton Center. It's a nonprofit event, volunteer run, and it's going to be running through October 25th, rain or shine. And you can go there and get bakery goods, you can get all types of produce, seafood, there's music, you can have a good time. And some of the participants are Lane Gardens Farm, O'Brien's Bakery, Fresh Catch Seafood, and many, many more. So get up there on Saturdays from 10 to 2. You get healthy. You can also support Stoughton's Farmers Market. Concerts in the park. Now you're going to get an opportunity on some of these groups to see the great Roy Cohen just strumming away. So this is your opportunity to get out there. Coming up on the 13th of July are the Corvairs. On the 20th, Political Asylum. On the 27th of July, the Villanairs. And August 3rd, Outside City Limits. August 10th, It Is What It Is. And August 17th, Ghost Riders. It's free admissions, Sundays at 5 o'clock p.m. I forgot the name of the park, but in terms of, I know I've been out there with many others enjoying it. It's the park that's off of Park Street, and I'm sure that Roy or someone will make sure in the next ad we'll have the park listed up there, but I know all you good Stoughton residents know exactly where the location is. So definitely come on out. Support our Library Association, Inc., 84 Park Street, Stoughton, Mass. or you can also email them at solarstoughton@gmail.com or give them a call at 781-341-0856.
Hi, it's Gary LaPierre, and the crew wants to thank Maxie's Delicatessen. That's at 117 Sharon Street in Stoughton. They're 781-341-1662. American Cancer Society, yes, they're looking for volunteers. Drive cancer patients to and from their treatments. 1-800-ACS-6662, or just go to www.cancer.org. Ilsa Mark's Food Pantry in St. Anthony's Free Market, 2 Park Avenue in Stoughton. For more information, call Christine Gallagher. That's at 781-341-0611 or 781-341-0549. Meals on Wheels. Just ask for Jessica. You'll find her at 781-344-8882, extension 2. Stoughton Penny Saver. Our business is advertising your business, they tell us. 27 Rose Glen Street, Stoughton, 781-344-4833. Community Forum showtimes in Stoughton. It's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at 6 p.m., Monday at 8 p.m., Tuesday at 5 p.m. It's on Comcast Channel 9 and Verizon Channel 28. All comments and suggestions welcome. Contact us at communityforum1@yahoo.com. Community Forum showtimes in Easton. Mondays at 9 p.m., Tuesday at 8 a.m., Wednesdays 3 p.m., Saturday 10 a.m. And that too, Comcast Channel 9, Verizon Channel 22. Samaritans, they're at 41 West Street on the 4th floor in Boston, 02111. Their phone number is 617-536-2460. 24-hour helplines for Samaritans, and the number is 877-870-HOPE. That's 877-870-4673. Samaritans, you can find them at 800-252-TEEN. That's 252-8336. Or find them online at SamaritansHope.org.
Well, welcome again. You are watching Community Forum. My guest today is our great Senator, Senator Brian A. Joyce, and we're continuing our conversation, helping you to understand exactly what happens when you serve as a legislator in this great state of, or Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And when you have the best senator of them all, then a lot of things get done. So, Senator, I want to come back to a committee because, again, to be the chair of a number of committees, and I'd like you to go through that list again, the ones you chair and that you serve on, because, again, I want folks to understand the importance of the hierarchy that takes place in our legislative process. And then I like to particularly focus upon the transportation bond bill and those efforts, because you said the multi-billions of dollars. So we're going off not only for, if you and I are around the 30 years that you're planning for now, God bless us both. But nonetheless, can you talk about that a little bit? The committees that you chair and serve on, and then let's talk about your efforts on as chair of the Transportation Bond Bill Committee, or the Bond Committee.
Sure. Well, my primary responsibility as committee chairmanship is the bonding committee. It's all the long-term spending in the state. So, and it's particularly important this year. We have this process, this long-standing process where all of the long-term debt is authorized every 5 years. So we've had no fewer than 8 bond bills before my committee. It's a bunch of gobbledygook, but what I'm suggesting is it was over $23 billion. Some of those payments, will come due in, at least as proposed, 40 years from now. So one of the things we tackled out of my committee this year was to reduce the amount of indebtedness that our state has. And, we have a moral obligation to our children and their children to not pass on a legacy of debt. So when I came to this committee, we had, depending upon the measurement, the first, second, or third greatest debt per capita of any state in the union. And that really troubled me. I know that every administration wants to have legacy projects, wants to embark on new projects, whether it's transportation. I would say, hey, let's fix and run our existing transportation infrastructure better before we try to expand. We can't support our existing. But one of the things that we really focused on this year was to reduce the cost of our borrowing. And some of the steps were fairly straightforward. For example, the transportation bond bill that came to us from the administration would suggest borrowings 40 years into the future on projects that may or may not be meritorious. And I didn't want to so constrain us in our children. Moreover, good borrowing practice is that the length of the borrowing should not exceed the length of the expected life of the asset. So we were borrowing for 30 years, for example, for road resurfacing that lasts 10 years. Just by reducing the terms of our borrowing on that bill alone out of my committee, we saved the taxpayers an estimated $500 million. I think it might have been 580. It was in excess of $500 million. Now, what gets the news, it gets people's attention, is some sensational item that impacts 3 people. What I'm talking about is boring but important. And it's funny, Joseph, when I talk to my conservative friends, I say, look, we got to protect the taxpayers' investment and not waste tax dollars. And when I talk to my more progressive friends, I say, hey, if we don't waste money on this unnecessary debt expense, debt servicing, we can then invest in things that our collective values would suggest we support. But it's the same thing. None of us, Democrat or Republican, conservative or progressive, should want to waste money. And so we've taken the transportation bond bill. We did an information technology bond bill that we also think will save hundreds of millions of dollars. Out of our committee, we think we've reduced the cost of borrowing this year in excess of $1 billion. And that's a good legacy to leave, and particularly for our children and their children. Another thing is we're going to spread it out so that they don't come due every 5 years, that it's staggered year to year so that each one of these bills gets the thoughtful and careful deliberation it deserves. In addition to the bonding committee, I sit on the Ways and Means Committee, which is the committee that crafts all state spending, yes, including the operating budget, that is the year-to-year budget, which is in the neighborhood of $36 billion. I'm the vice chair of the Healthcare Financing Committee, which has been a pretty important item in recent years, and the cost of healthcare was really bankrupting small businesses and potentially cities and towns in the state until we got a grip on that. And I also am the vice chair of the Financial Services Committee that oversees banks and insurers and the like. I sit on other committees as well as a member. And so that's one part of the job, as I mentioned. The other part is to advocate for my district, like the town of Stoughton and each of the 10 towns that I represent. And then finally, for the 170,000 people. We get inundated with emails, and we can't always tell where that sender is from. It could be a person from out of state, but when we can identify someone as from our district, we try to get back to each and every person within 24 hours.
Well, I can simply say, Senator, that has been the case, notwithstanding the fact that we're friends. It has been the case when I've served in official capacities as well. You and your staff have just been extraordinary in being responsive and cooperative when you've been called upon to ask questions, to advocate for things that are of importance to Stoughton. So I definitely want to state that,
You're kind
that's so.
I'll tell you another thing. As you gain seniority and perhaps responsibility in the legislature, there's kind of an inverse relationship in terms of your ability to be in the community as much as, earlier in my career, I was able to be at every local event. Now my responsibilities in the State House often prevent me from being at every local event, and that's much to my chagrin. I love the local events. I love to be out and about. We just, recently went through the 4th of July, and, the Stoughton parade was rained out for the first time in recent memory. I'll tell you, the town always has their parade at 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, on the 4th, So we go through these series of parades, and we end with Stoughton. And I've marched in it when it was over 100 degrees, true story. My now 16-year-old was about maybe 7 at the time, and I thought DSS was going to take him from me because he was dehydrated. And then another time, we got precisely halfway through the route. We were right in the middle of the route, and the skies opened up. And so there was no going back. We just marched forward. My wife was able to get in the car, but the rest of us marched forward, you know.
Well, that's dedication.
Yeah.
That is definitely dedication. But again, I mean, I guess some part of what we've talked about today really gives folks the essence of what it is, the job you do, because I think some people do take it for granted. Or they try to characterize it in generalities in terms of, oh, well, nothing is going on. And I think it's programs such as this which point out there's a lot that's going on. There's a lot that's being done. And I think your point which says, yeah, I can no longer come by. It reminds me of when I was a young lawyer and I would go up there and I was handling real estate transactions. Yes, I used to go out there in the beginning. I'd flush the toilets and check all all the places and poke around with the clients. You don't have the ability to do that as you begin to move on and your responsibilities expand. And I think having you in leadership positions up at the State House is more beneficial for us. And then when you can show up and when you have some of your aides participating, I want folks to understand that that's just as good and you do care.
Well, let me just say, and again, you're very, very kind. Let me just try to make a couple of points that, politics can and should be a noble profession. And there are some extraordinary men and women who have served in the Massachusetts Senate, where I serve, going back to the 1600s, believe it or not. In its current iteration, since 1787, I think, is our Massachusetts Constitution. But the Massachusetts Senate actually predates the Constitution, goes back to about 1640. Some extraordinary men and women have served there. We've had 3 presidents, John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Calvin Coolidge. But a lot of extraordinary men and women serve there today, not just in elected office, but in staff positions. We have a very hardworking, relatively low-paid, dedicated staff that helps make the wheels of government run. And we also have a very collegial relationship in the Senate between Democrats and Republicans. We're all friends. We're all trying to do what's right. Sometimes even within our party we have different perspectives, but I know they're all good men and women trying to do what's right. People often get turned off, I think, by what's going on in Washington. I think it is somewhat the pervasive and corrupt influence of money, that there's just so much money in politics with lobbyists and special interests. And just reading a great book by Hedrick Smith called Who Stole the American Dream? And it goes back to the 1970 when business lobbyists started descending on Washington. An excellent read, but we don't have that, at least as of yet, in the state level. We have some incredibly good men and women. We don't have the divisiveness that you see in Washington that serves nobody's best interest. And so one of the things that I do is I take in interns every summer and even during the school year, college kids and law students. And so many of these young people that we expose to the operations of our office go on to public service that is very encouraging. And they see, wow, this people, you really can make a discernible difference. You don't have to be one of those millions of men that lives lives of quiet desperation. Every day you get up, it's different. Every day you can help, whether it's a simple act of kindness for a constituent or a big policy matter. It is an exciting, opportunity, and I never, ever, ever forget just how lucky I am to serve as your senator. I mean, I'm very, very lucky, and I know that, and I appreciate the opportunity. I really do.
Well, Senator, we only have a few more moments, and I wanted to say, and we're happy to have you as well. And it's interesting you raised the point about the interns, because I had a professor when I was, because I was a political science major at Northeastern, and Professor Steve Worth in my last year had us do a project where they were closing the state's closing the state, not the state institutions, but the youth facilities, the state youth facilities back there in 1975. And so again, I've been in public service, so I think some of what you're doing would be an encouragement. But before you go, you talked about money. I got to talk about the casinos. I can't let you get away. We don't have a whole bunch of time, so you won't have to talk long about it. Just very briefly, a lot's going on. What do you see as far as a precursor? We have a lot of discussion. Yeah. Things that happen in Revere, Boston, down in Springfield.
Okay, so let me try to summarize it relatively quickly. First, the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe has been recognized by the federal government. Under federal law, once their land is recognized, they can open a casino with or without state approval, and we wouldn't get any taxes. So that was really the push for getting out in front, putting a regulatory framework and taxing it, because it was going to happen with or without us. So I accept that, but we went from there, really a slippery slope, to 3 casinos and slots. And I am concerned about that. I really am concerned whether it's good public policy, whether it's good fiscal policy. Just in the past week, I've read articles in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and USA Today on the precipitous decline in gambling revenues in many municipalities, and particularly in Atlantic City, where it's gone from some $5 billion to roughly half that, and a number of casinos have closed. And if government builds its budget based on revenues that could easily dissipate, it's no longer Las Vegas, Atlantic City destinations. It's about 40 of the 50 states. So we have, it really, the pie isn't necessarily growing. There's more slices. So we already have slots down in Rhode Island. New Hampshire's talking about it. Connecticut has it. New York has it. So,
but you know what, Senator? I'm gonna have to stop you there because I opened up an issue.
All right.
That I don't have
Last
enough
thing.
time.
The voters are going to decide. It's going to be on the ballot this fall, and we will abide by the wishes of the voters. I think the Mashpee Wampanoag casino is going to happen one way or another.
But I'm going to have you back. We can talk about that, talk about the election. We'll talk about that as well when I have you back.
Let me end with this. My vote for president, governor, and every other office is Joseph Feaster. First and last on your ballot, Joseph Feaster.
And with that note, we're going to say goodnight. Senator, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for making this a great show.
Pleasure.